this video. So just get the link and head over to the design part. I even provided a couple of different variations, but we'll be using this blue color scheme that indicates trust when purchasing or renting real estate. We have different colors here. We have the splash screen, the authentication screen, as well as the home, details, search, filters, and profiles. Everything that a mobile application needs to have. If you look more closely, you'll notice that there is an auth screen where we'll use Google to authenticate the users. Then there are different screens like the homepage, which has the tabs at the bottom. And that one is similar to Explore page, which also has those tabs at the bottom. And the same thing goes for the profile. Finally, there is another details page screen, this one right here, which doesn't have the tabs. So we'll have to keep that in mind when configuring our screens. We have to make sure that tabs are only available on specific screens. So first, let's create a new file within the app, and let's call it signin.tsx. That's sign-in.tsx. WebStorm asks me if I want it to be tracked. Sure, let's go ahead and add it. And let's just create a simple React arrow function component in it. But actually, can we do rn fce, maybe something like this, React native functional component, or React native functional component with exports. Yep, this is looking great to me. So it's rnfe, which is a snippet that quickly creates a new React native component. You can get the snippet by heading over to your code editor and then heading over to plugins or packages. And then you can search for something like React or React native snippets. You should be able to very quickly find it. In this case, I'm using modern React snippets. So as you can see, we have a simple page that uses a view, which you can think of as a div in regular web development, and text, which you can think of as a paragraph, but in React Native, it's a text. Now we want to move our app index.tsx, which is this one, into a new folder so we can show the tabs. So let's create a new folder. Let's call it, in parentheses, root. And then within the root, let's create another route group and let's call it tabs in parentheses. And now we can move the index.tsx within the tabs. Now within it, we can create two other screens that will include tabs, and that'll be explore.tsx page, where we can also run rnfe to quickly spin it up, and we can create another one, which will be called profile.tsx to show our user profile, rnfe, and we should be good to go. And finally, outside of the tabs, we'll also need to show property details. So let's create a new page under app, root, but not within the tabs. And let's create a new folder called properties. And since we're using the file-based routing similar to Next.js, we can actually create a new file where you can put square brackets, ID, and then .tsx. So here it's a bit different. Instead of declaring a new folder, that'll be within square brackets, like in Next.js. Here, you do it directly within the file. You can also run rnfe. We can call this one property, as in property details, real estate properties. And I can show you how we can also extract this ID at the top. Similar to Next.js, you can say const destructure the ID from use local search params. And this you can import from expo router. It automatically provides you with the functionality to get that ID from the routing parameters. So now you can say property, and then you can declare the ID so we can see on which property we're on. Finally, we can modify the home page by heading over to tabs, index.tsx, to see if the routes are working. I'll remain within the view and remove this piece of text. And instead, I will add a new link that'll have an href equal to /sign in. And it'll say sign in. We of course have to import this link component by saying import link coming from expo router, and we can duplicate it 3 times. The second one will point to the explore page. So we can say explore, and the text will also say explore. After that, we can have the profile page. So that's going to be /profile. And finally, we can have /properties /1 as the default example property that we have, which will lead to property details. So if I save this, I'll now need to open up the terminal and press R to reload the application. I'll also click allow right here. And you can see that now on the home page, we can access the sign in page. If I click, you can go to it. And the pretty cool thing is that on iOS, you typically swipe from the left to the right to go back. And you can see that this motion is natively implemented. Same thing as the top back button. On Android, it's going to be a bit different, but the key thing is that it works on both operating systems straight out of the box. And we can now navigate all of these different pages we have created. They're not looking good and they're not containing any code whatsoever right now, but they will soon. Before we code them out though, we'll want to set up some kind of a theme for our application to make the styling easier. After all, we want to achieve this beautiful design, right? On web, we would use something like Tailwind CSS, but in React Native, we'll use Native Wind. Do you like using Tailwind CSS to style your apps? Well, this helps you do that in React Native. It's not a component library, it's a styling library, allowing you to just more easily style your components. So let's head over to getting started with Expo Router. And here we can follow the installation steps. First things first, switch over from npm to Expo and then copy the installation command. After that, we can head to our second terminal and paste the command. npx expo install, native wind, tailwind CSS, and all the other good stuff. When that gets installed, run npx tailwind css init. This will create a new tailwind.config.js file, which you can find right here. Now we want to modify it a bit, so simply copy this tailwind config from here and paste it in here. And I also noticed that I missed running the npx pod install to finish the installation of React Native Reanimated. So let's also paste that into the terminal as well. Should be pretty simple. Once that is done, we can create a CSS file called globals.css and add the Tailwind CSS directives. So let's head over into the app and let's create a new file called globals.css and simply paste the Tailwind CSS directives. After that, we have to add the Babel preset. So copy this babel.config.js code and create a new file called babel.config.js and paste it right here. It has to be outside of the app, so within the root of your application. After that, if your project does not have a metro.config, you can set up a new metro config file. So let's copy npx expo customize metro config and paste it to your terminal. This will generate a new metro config file. So make sure to copy and paste the code from here into it. It'll make sure that it includes native wind. Finally, we can head over to our app_layout.tsx, which is right here. And here we can import the globals.css by saying import /globals.css to add Tailwind to our application. That was the fifth step. And optionally for TypeScript, we need to add an additional file called nativewind-env.ts. So let's create a new file right here, new file called nativewind-env.d.ts. And within it, you can add this piece of code. That's it. Now we can restart our server one more time by going to our terminal and pressing Ctrl C to stop it from running, and then pressing npx expo start again to rerun it on our application, and then press R to reload. Finally, let's head over to our index.tsx of the tabs. And by the way, to immediately switch to a file like what I have done right now, you just have to press Command or Control P and then start typing the name of the file you want to switch to. It's much easier than going here and then manually heading over into it. So let's test it out. I will add a new piece of text right here at the top. And it can say something like, welcome to Restate, which is the name of our application. And to make sure that Tailwind CSS works, we can give it a class name equal to font-bold, text-lg, and margin Y of 10. If you save it and reload, the changes did not take effect, and we got one warning saying route nativewind.d.ts is missing the required export. Ensure a React component is exported as default. Oh, it looks like I created it accidentally within the app, but it was supposed to be right here outside in the root of the directory. So now that error is gone, but Tailwind CSS is still not activated. We are importing the globals.css within the layout, and we have properly created all of the necessary files like Metro, Babel, and even the Tailwind config. If we head over into the Metro config, you'll notice that the second parameter of this with native wind function is actually the path to our globals.css file. And I just said /globals.css, but it was supposed to be /app/globals.css. So if we fix this, and also if we head over into tailwind.config.js, here, alongside tracking the changes in the app folder, we'll also have to track the changes in the components folder. So let's copy this path, paste it here, and say /components, and then everything else is the same. Now the changes will not take effect until you stop your application from running completely by pressing Ctrl C and then rerun it with npx expo start, and only then reload the application. I struggle with this all the time. I make some changes, but it's not like doing web development where everything happens instantly. Still, sometimes whenever you change routes or some big setup things like this, you will need to stop your application and then rerun it entirely. But with that in mind, you can now see that if you head over to tabs, index.tsx, the font bold, text LG, and margin Y of 10 are actually getting applied on this welcome to restate text. So that's great. That means that native wind has been successfully set up. In the next lesson, let's set up the fonts and assets we'll use throughout this application. To make this project look as good as it does in the design, we have to have many different assets that make it what it is, such as this splash screen icon, or this icon showing different properties, or even these little icons right here that show the user how many beds, bats, and square feet there is. Now, what you could do is manually download each one of these icons from the design by just clicking on it, like right here, heading down, and then exporting it as a PNG or SVG or whatever. You can totally do that. But just to make that process a bit simpler and to show you how you can properly name the downloads or the exports from this Figma file, I provided you with the complete zip file of all of the assets and fonts. So just head over to the GitHub repo, scroll down to the README and snippets to copy, and just download it. First, you'll be able to find the assets. So delete the current assets that you have here by deleting them, and then download, unzip, and paste the new ones right here in the root of your application. It should contain the fonts, the icons, and the images we'll use throughout the rest of the project. You can do the same thing with constants. Copy them and paste them right here. Constants will include some predefined data for the cards, the imports of all of the icons, as well as the exports, so we can use them more simply, as well as the imports and exports of all of the images. No code that contains logic here, just plain old static data. Now, let's head over to our app.json, and within here, we can manage our icon. That's the icon that'll be displayed in the splash screen. This one is looking good, and it already points to the icon.png that we have added right here, but we have to change this one right here to point from adaptive icon to just icon.png as well. Let's see what else do we have. The favicon is looking good. Next, we have images, splash-icon.png, and finally, we have to add the fonts. So right above experiments, add a new array right here, and within it, create a new string called expo-font, which is a special package which we'll install right now. And as the second parameter, add an object saying fonts. And then within it, we can declare different fonts right here. We can import them coming from /assets/fonts/Rubik-bold.ttf. And you can keep repeating that for all of the other variations of the font that we have, such as Rubik bold is going to become extra bold. After that, we're going to have a Rubik-medium. We can also have Rubik-light. Let's have Rubik-regular. And finally, Rubik-semi-bold. All of these, if properly structured, let's just make sure that happens. We have to put it right here, one space above. There we go. So now it's properly structured. And remove this extra comma. And this one, because we're working with the JSON file. So you can see we're simply importing all of the fonts from assets fonts right here, so we can use them within our application. And another thing you can notice right here is a new way of setting up a splash screen within Expo using Expo splash screen package. Instead of saying image width is 200, we can remove this image width altogether, change the resize mode to cover, and then we can also add enable full screen image _legacy. I found this field to help with showing the splash screen on the full screen. But the important thing to take away is that this is all completely new in Expo. Before, there wasn't a specific Expo package that you can use to set up splash screen, but now there is, and you can configure it just like this as shown in the documentation. Everything is right here within Expo docs. And absolutely the same thing is happening with Expo fonts, allowing you to do it all within a single config file. Now, let's head over to our _layout, and let's load all of these fonts by saying import, use fonts, and this is coming from Expo font. Next, we can load them by saying const fonts loaded is equal to use fonts, and to it, you can pass a map of all of the fonts and their font's name, such as Rubik-bold, and here we can require, and then a path to that font, such as /assets/fonts/Rubik-bold.ttf. And we can duplicate this and do the same thing for different fonts. So let me duplicate it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more times. We can go from Rubik bold to Rubik extra bold. We can also change the font name to Rubik extra bold. After that, we can do Rubik light and change this to light as well. Finally, we have Rubik medium. After medium, we of course have regular. And after regular, we have semi-bold. So that'll look something like this. Finally, we can use a use effect right here, still like in good old React, and say if fonts loaded. In that case, we can run splash screen coming from Expo router dot hide async. So if fonts have loaded, we can hide the splash screen and continue to the app. So as a dependency, I will check whether the fonts have loaded. Also, if for whatever reason fonts don't load, so if not fonts loaded, we can simply return null, and else we'll return the stack of the router, meaning show us whatever page we should be on. Now, in order to use those custom fonts and colors, we have to head over to tailwind.config.js, and we need to extend our theme. So here, under extend, we can choose the font family, and then we can put an object where we can call a font Rubik by its name, and then we can provide an array of all of the different fonts, such as Rubik-regular, and then sans serif. We can do the same thing for other fonts, such as Rubik-bold, and choose Rubik bold. That's going to look like this, or sans serif. We can repeat that for extra bold, and we're going to say extra bold right here. We can repeat it a few more times. I notice it's spelled bold 2 times here. So from extra bold, we're going to go to medium. Here, we're going to also go to Rubik medium. After that, we're going to have Rubik semi-bold. Same thing here, Rubik semi-bold. And finally, we'll have Rubik light. So let's change this over to Rubik light, as well as Rubik light right here. Now, we can also extend the colors besides just extending the font family. So we have to do it within the extend part, right next to the font family, and that's going to be colors. Now, conveniently, this autofilled some of the colors for me, but we don't want to get those colors. We want to get the colors from our design. And we're going to have multiple versions of each variant. So for the primary, we'll have a variation of 100. Next, we're going to have a variation of 200. And we're going to have a variation of 300 as well. So where can we find those colors? Well, you can find all of them within the design. Obviously, blue is our primary color. So if you choose one shade of blue right here, you can see that it is this color right here. And then we apply different opacities of that color to get different shades of the primary color. Same thing for our black variant. So let's copy this first one and put it right here. After that, we can get the second one, but you can notice that it is actually the same color. So if we copy it and paste it here, it's going to say that it's the same thing. But we can apply different opacities by saying 0A at the end, and on this one saying 1A, different shades or different opacities of the color will be applied. So this is applying a 10% opacity right here. And then finally for the 300, it'll be the base variant of that color. So now we can see the difference between those three. We can do the same thing for the accent color. For that one, we're going to have just one variant of 100. That's going to be hash FBFBFD. That's going to be a whitish color. And finally, we're going to have a black color. For the black, we're going to have a default, which will just be pure black. So that's the default. And then after that, we'll also have variants for 100, which is going to be something like hash 8C8E98. That's going to be a grayish color. After that, we're going to have 200, which is going to be something like 666876. And another shade of 300, which will be a hash of 191D31. Finally, we need a red color, which will be called danger. And danger will be hash F75555. That's kind of an orangish reddish color. Great. Now to test whether everything works as expected, let's stop our server from running by pressing Ctrl+C and then rerun it by saying npx expo start, and then press R to reload. If you reload, back in your expo application, you should now see that favicon that we selected, React Native Real Estate. There we go. That's looking amazing. So you can see how easy it is to change the splash screen. Now, after each new reload, a splash screen will appear, and then it'll load the fonts. So to check out the fonts, we can head over to our index.tsx, right here where we have the text, and we can say font-Rubik, and we can also maybe add a text, and we can say font-Rubik, and we can also maybe add a text-3XL instead of text-LG. If I save this, you can see that now it has a completely different font. Now, before we proceed doing anything else, if you check out the constants, you'll notice that there are errors happening, saying that our imports don't actually exist, or something like cannot find module, or its corresponding type declarations. This issue is actually coming from TypeScript, and I'll show you how we can fix it. Right in the root of your application, create a new file called image.d.ts. D stands for declaration, and here we can declare different TypeScript rules. So let's say declare module *.png, so all PNG files, const value will be any, and export default value. So we know that we're just exporting different PNGs of a type any, and that's okay. Now we can duplicate this 1, 2, 3 more times, or let's do it 4 times for different type extensions. We can have a .jpg, .jpeg, maybe a .gif, as well as a .svg. And now we have declared the types for all of these images. So if you open it up within constants, you should see that those type errors are now gone. Great. So now we not only have the routes, but we also have the fonts as well as the base theming of our application. So soon enough, we'll be able to start coding out our first screen. The first screen we'll develop is of course the sign in screen because it's the first thing that a user sees. But before we do that, let's modify all the screens to remove this ugly default header at the top. Go to _layout and modify it to hide the navbar. We can do that by saying stack screen options and say header shown will be set to false. If you do that and reload, it'll immediately be gone, but now our text will be moved to the top left of the screen. That's not a bad thing because now we will implement the real UI of that page. So let's head over to sign in, and instead of having a view, let's actually change this to safe area view. Safe area view, coming from React Native safe area context, ensures that whatever you're trying to show safely fits within the borders of your screen, no matter which screen that is, be that an iPhone, Android, or something else. You can see how now that sign in came from the top left all the way to here within a visible zone. I'll also give it a class name equal to bg-white as well as h-full. Next, I'll remove this text and I'll add a scroll view, allowing the user to scroll if their device height is too small to be able to see the full thing. And I'll import it from React Native. To this scroll view, I will apply a content container class name equal to h-full to give it a full height. Within it, I will render an image coming from React Native as well. This will be a self-closing image tag that'll have a source equal to images.onboarding, a class name equal to w-full and h-4/6, and a resize mode equal to contain. So that's going to look something like this. But of course, we have to fix this typo in the class name, and we have to import images coming from constants images. So that's going to be import images from @constants/images, from where we're exporting all of the images we're creating. That's going to look something like this. If you head over there, you can see all of them. And immediately this image pops up right here and makes our application look so much better. Right below that image, let's render a view. And as I already told you, view in React Native is just like a regular div in web development. So let's give it a class name of padding x of 10 to create some space. Within it, let's render a piece of text that says, welcome to restate. We can style it a bit by giving it a class name of text-base, text-center, uppercase, font-rubric, and text-black-200. There we go. That's just a smaller subtitle. Below it, we can render another piece of text. This will be the primary heading with a class name equal to text-3xl, font-rubric-bold, text-black-300, text-center, and a margin top of 2 to divide it a bit from the top. Within it, we can say something like, let's get you closer to, and then we can create some space right here, by putting a new line character. And then within it, we can render another piece of text that'll say your ideal home. Now make sure to properly close it. And there we go. Let's get you closer to new line, your ideal home. We can also change the class name on this text to be something like text-primary-300. Much easier than having to manually type the hexadecimal value of that color, right? We just get it from Tailwind. Now below this text that's containing the smaller one, let's create another text. And this one for now, we'll simply say login to restate with Google. And here we can render a class name of text-lg, font-rubric, text-black-200, text-center, and a margin top of 12. Now below that text, we can render our first button, but it's not called a button here. It's actually called a touchable opacity, coming from React Native. A bit of a weird name, I know, but if you think about it, you're not clicking a button, you're actually touching it. So that's why it's called a touchable opacity in React Native. You can give it an onPress handler, which can be equal to handle login. So once we click on it or press on it, you can then call the handle login function. So let me create it right here at the top by saying const handle login is equal to an empty React arrow function for now. And this touchable opacity can also have a class name equal to bg_white shadow-md shadow-zinc-300 rounded-full w-full padding y of 4 and margin top of 5. And now we can slowly start seeing this button appear, but it'll be much more visible once we render a Google image right within it. So that'll be an image with a opacity, can also have a class name equal to bg_white shadow-md shadow-zinc-300 rounded-full w-full padding y of 4 and margin top of 5. And now we can slowly start seeing this button appear, but it'll be much more visible once we render a Google image right within it. So that'll be an image with a source of icons.google with a class name equal to w of 5 and h of 5 for width and the height, and a resize mode equal to contain. Of course, icons is coming from constants like images, so we have to import it right here. Import icons from constants icons. And with that, you should be able to see this Google icon. Let's see if it shows up if I reload. Head over to sign in. And no, it's still not there, even though I'm properly linking to the Google icon. Interesting. Let's try to put it within a view first to properly center it. So I'll create a new view that'll have a class name equal to flex. And now I'll put this image right within that view that is then within the touchable opacity. So that's going to look something like this. I'll also give it a flex-row and items-center, as well as justify-center. And then right after the image, still within the view, I will render a piece of text that'll say something like continue with Google. And I can style it further by giving it a class name of text-lg, font-rubric-medium, text-black-300, and a margin left to divide it a bit from the logo. But why is the logo not showing? Oh, I see. It's my web development self sabotaging me. And that'll happen a lot when developing React Native applications. Even though the goal is to make it so similar to web development, some things will be just a bit different. Like here, to the image, instead of passing an src, you would need to pass a source. I think that's the same as in Next.js, so actually we're good. But yeah, this is looking good now. And hey, believe it or not, this is it. This is our first screen. Yep, in a matter of minutes, you have successfully developed the UI and the UX of our first screen. Is it only an image, a piece of text, and a button? Sure, it is. But hey, you've developed it. And you can actually click on this button, you can scroll up and down to see more, and it's just looking great. But now we have to actually make it work. So in the next lesson, I'll show you how we can set up a backend as a service tool, which we'll use to host our database and which will help us with the auth. If you watched more than a couple of my videos, then you already know that I love using AppWrite, as it allows me to set up my entire backend within minutes. It's open source and it allows you to implement auth, databases, storage, even messaging, and more. So if I scroll down a bit, you can see that without the hassle, we can get secure login for all of the users, databases where we can store, query, and manage data, and even fully customize our backend. Now, why am I telling you this? Isn't AppWrite just for web applications? Well, not at all. If you head over to the docs, you'll see Apple and even React Native supported as one of the technologies we can use to start building with AppWrite. In this course, we'll use it for auth, databases, and storage. And later on, you'll be able to work on this project further to improve it by making it into a CMS where other users or agents can add their own real estate properties right to the application. So with that in mind, click the special AppWrite link down in the description to be able to follow along and see exactly what I'm seeing during the setup. You'll also get some free credits, even though you won't be needing them, because AppWrite is completely free for unlimited projects that never get paused, and you get plenty of storage. So let's get started. I already have quite a couple of projects active, but this time let's create a new project. Let's call it something like JSM underscore, and then you can put whatever name you want. In this case, I'll do rate, but you can use something else. Next, you can choose the region. So far, only Frankfurt is available, but in the future, there's gonna be many other regions, and new project has been created. Once you open it, you'll be able to choose React Native as an option right here, and you can enter your application name. I'll call it restate once again, with a package name of com.jsm.restate. And then you can copy this command that allows you to install AppWrite SDK for React Native and the required dependencies, and you can paste it right here within your second terminal. While that is installing, let's go to the next step. You won't have to initialize the SDK right here by following the steps, as I'll teach you how to do that very soon. So, all set, let's go to the dashboard. And where were we? I believe we were setting up the auth. So let's head over to the auth part, go to settings, and choose Google Auth. It'll be right here in the middle. And now we need to keep this page open, copy the redirect URI, and then we have to set up OAuth on the Google side of things. So head over to console.cloud.google.com, and it should lead you to a page that looks like this. There, you need to create a new project, and I'll call it Restate. Click Create, and it'll be created within a minute. Now, select Project, head into it, and then at the top, you can search for Google Auth, and this will lead you to the Google Auth platform. Head over to Clients and get started. Here, you can enter the app name, such as Restate, as well as the support email. You can say that this app will be used externally with other users, and you can put your contact email address. Finally, agree to sell your soul, and continue. Now, create a new OAuth client. Application type can be web, as it's most similar to a React Native application, and it doesn't really matter. And add an authorized redirect URI, the one that you copied from AppWrite. Yep, this one right here. Click Create, and there we go. You have your Google OAuth client. So now, copy the client ID and the secret. You can get the client ID from here, and then paste it over to AppWrite. And you can get the secret by clicking on the web client and zooming out a bit. And there we go. Client secret is right here on the right. You can add it right here under App Secret and click Update. There we go. Google Authentication has been updated and it has been enabled. Now, before we dive into code, we'll have to register another platform type in AppWrite to make sure that this auth works. That's because AppWrite is handling the OAuth sign-in for us here. So the redirects will be of the AppWrite domain. These redirects will create a session for our application and then redirect us to our app. So head over to the overview and scroll down and create a new platform. Choose Web App, enter a name, something like Restate Web, and set the host name as asterisk, meaning everything, just to make sure we can reach it. Click Next, and we'll deal with the setup later. So now just skip these optional steps and copy the project ID right here at the top. Go back to your app and create a new .local .env, or rather .env.local file. There, you can say expo underscore public underscore appride underscore project underscore ID and make it equal to the project ID that you just copied, as well as expo public appride endpoint, which will be equal to the endpoint of the appride service. So that's https://cloud.appride.io/v1. And now that our appride project as well as the Google authentication have been set up, in the next lesson, we'll focus on integrating appride's SDKs right within our. The entire setup of our appride SDK will be happening in a single file, just to keep everything organized. So within the root of our application, create a new folder and call it lib, as in library. And within the lib, create a new file called appride.ts. Within it, we can set up our appride client. We can do that by first exporting our configuration object by saying export const config is equal to an object where we can define the platform that we specified before. I believe that was com.jsm.restate. For you, it might have been something different. You have entered this during the setup. And I'm not sure if we can actually get to the same name that you used once again. You can just go here and see the name, but not the actual platform that you entered. So hopefully you can remember it. If not, you can rewatch the video to see what I used, or just create a new platform. After that, we can define an endpoint, and that's going to be equal to process.env.expo underscore public underscore appride underscore endpoint. So we're simply referring to our environment variable. And then we can have another one for the project ID, which will be equal to expo public appride project ID. After that, we can define and export a new version of the appride client by saying export const client is equal to new client. This client is of course coming from React Native appride. And then we can say client.set endpoint to be equal to config.endpoint. Now, TypeScript is not sure whether we have added this environment variable or not. So to let it know, hey, I know that it is here. I entered it. We can add an exclamation mark right here at the end. After that, we can call a .setProject and pass in the config.project ID. And finally, we can call the .setPlatform and set that to be equal to config.platform. Next, we'll have to define which different functionalities we're going to use from appride. So we can say export const avatar. We'll use avatars to generate an image avatar based on the user's first and last name. So that's going to be new avatars coming from React Native appride, to which we pass the client we created. And we'll also do export const account is equal to new account, which is also coming from React Native appride, to which we pass the client, which will allow us to create new user accounts. Now that we have this setup out of the way, we can create a new action. I'll call it export async function login. Yep, we're implementing the functionality to authenticate our user. I'll open up a try and catch block just to make sure that everything goes right. But if it doesn't, we can catch it and we can deal with it. So in the catch, I'll simply say console.error, error, and I will return false, meaning something went wrong. But what if something goes right? Well, first things first, we need to generate a redirect URI to handle the OAuth response. So once we go to Google, we have to go back to our application, letting us know that we have authenticated. So for that, we'll use an Expo module for handling deep links and redirect URLs called Expo linking. It's already added as one of the dependencies of Expo, so it's super simple to use it. At the top, you'll just say import everything as linking from Expo linking. And then right here, you can generate that redirect URI by saying const redirect URI is equal to linking dot create URL, to which you pass just a / URL pointing to the home page. And this URL should all be uppercased. You can see how as soon as WebStorm found a method of create URL, right here, it automatically told me that the first parameter of that method is actually the path by letting me know right here. Pretty cool. And if it had more, it would tell me what they are. Now, once we have the redirect URI that we want to redirect back to, we have to request an OAuth token from AppWrite using the Google provider. And we can do that by saying const response is equal to await account dot create OAuth 2 token. And to it, we have to pass a couple of parameters. The first parameter is the provider. So that's going to be equal to OAuth provider dot Google. So let's find it here. And then as the second parameter, we can pass the redirect URI. And of course, this OAuth provider is actually coming from React Native AppWrite. Perfect. Let's actually put this in multiple lines so we can see it more easily. That is await account dot create OAuth 2 token. As the first parameter, we pass the OAuth provider dot Google, and as the second, the redirect URI. After that, we can check if no response exists, then we can throw a new error saying something like failed to login. But line so we can see it more easily. That is await account dot create OAuth 2 token. As the first parameter, we pass the OAuth provider dot Google, and as the second, the redirect URI. After that, we can check if no response exists, then we can throw a new error saying something like failed to login. But if we have successfully created the OAuth 2 token, then we can open up a web browser session for OAuth process to continue by saying const browser result is equal to await open auth session async, to which we can pass the response dot to string. So this is the response from Google, as well as the redirect URI. You know how when you're in a mobile application and then sometimes it opens up that mobile browser within the app? Well, this is what we're doing here, and it is needed to properly use OAuth and authenticate using Google. After that, we can check if browser result dot type is not equal to success. In that case, we can simply throw a new error and say something like failed to login. Or you can be a bit more descriptive if you want to. But if everything went right, we can parse the newly returned URL to extract the query parameters by saying const URL is equal to new URL of browser result.url. And then we can extract the secret as well as the user ID by saying const secret is equal to url.searchparams.get secret dot to string, because we want to get the string of that. And then we can do the same thing for the user ID. We can extract it from the URL by saying url.searchparams.get user ID to string. Finally, if no secret or no user ID exists, we can throw a new error saying failed to login. But if we pass that check, then we can finally create a new account session by saying const session is equal to await account.create session and pass in the user ID as well as the secret. Finally, if no session exists, we can throw a new error saying failed to create a session. But if we have successfully created a session, you can either return the session or just return true, meaning we're successfully logged in. Now that we have the login function, we also have to very quickly create a logout function. So I will collapse this function right here, and right below it, I'll create a new export async function logout. And of course, it'll be much simpler. I'll open up a try and catch block. In the catch, I'll cancel the error and return false. But in the try, I'll say await account.delete session and then pass in the current, which will delete the currently existing session. And we have to create another function, which will allow us to fetch the information about the currently logged in user. That'll look something like this. Export async function get user. We can open up a try and catch block. In the catch, we can cancel the error and return null. But in the catch, we can try to fetch the response by saying await account.get. And finally, if there is a response $ID, in that case, we want to form a new user avatar, meaning generate an image containing that user's initials. AppWrite makes that super simple by saying const user avatar is equal to avatar.get initials, and to it you can pass the result.name, which we get from Google. In this case, that's going to be a response. Finally, if that goes right, we can put the return response right here, and we can return an object where we spread the entire response, as well as set the avatar to be equal to user avatar dot to string. So we can use it nicely on the front end. Great. So this was the major part of AppWrite SDK integration done, specifically the part allowing us to sign our user in. So in the next lesson, we'll use these functions we've created to integrate them directly within our beautiful sign-in screen. To integrate auth within our screen, let's go ahead and implement the login function right within the handle login function within the sign-in screen. I'll make this function asynchronous because within it, we have to call this login action we have created. So I'll say const result is equal to await login. Of course, coming from lib AppWrite. Next, if we get back the result, we can either navigate to the home screen, or for the time being, we can just put a console log of login successful. So that's gonna look something like this. Else, if we don't get back the response or the result, we can just do an alert, .alert, and that can be something like error, failed to login. And this alert is coming from React Native. So it's all built right into it. Now, we're not gonna test the login just yet. First, we wanna integrate a function that will fetch the user session to see if they're logged in or not. We can manually call it and handle all the related states, like loading, errors, and more. And this will be the same for all other AppWrite requests. Quite some boilerplate code. Error handling, loading states, and so much more. So instead of doing it for every single request, repeating ourselves, we can create a TanStack query-like hook that handles loading, error states, and gives us back our data depending on function parameters that we pass in, along the ability to refetch or request the same API again. So let me teach you how to make your code more scalable and reusable. I'll head over into the lib and create a new file called useAppWrite.ts. Typically, when a file starts with use, you know it'll be a custom hook. Now, in this file, I'll give you special code that you can copy from the description down below, head over to the GitHub README, code snippets to copy, and then just paste it right here. I want to make sure that you can paste it so we can together go through it and I can explain everything. The whole goal of this file is to create a new custom React hook that helps us manage AppWrite API calls with state and error handling. Now, since we'll be managing different kinds of calls, like get calls for properties, create calls, filter calls and search calls, and many other calls, we want to make sure that this function works for every single type of AppWrite call. So for that reason, we have to use some kind of generic TypeScript parameters like T and P, which allow us to not immediately define the type of a property. Rather, we can assign it once we actually pass some things into the function. So this function accepts different params, and we will define those params as P once they come in. So the P type will actually be different depending on the type of call we're making. That's why we had to define some of these interfaces here, just to make sure everything is type safe. Now, what is happening within this function? Well, we define the states for the data itself once it gets here. We then define the states for loading as well as error handling. And then we have a simple fetch data function, which tries to fetch the corresponding data with the right parameters. And once it fetches it, it simply sets it to the state. What it also does is sets the errors and loadings. Finally, we call it and return all of the necessary data with the possibility to display loading states, error states, and even the ability to refetch the data if needed. This function will make a lot of sense very soon as we start using it within our other screens. Now, in addition to getting this data, we'll also have to protect our screens and properly redirect users. First, we'll create a global auth provider and fetch the current user. And if the user is not there, then we'll redirect to the sign-in screen, or if it is, to the home screen. So let's create a new file within the lib folder and let's call it globalprovider.tsx. Within it, we'll use React context. So we can say const global context is equal to create context coming from React. We can say that it'll be of a type global context type, which we can define soon, or undefined, and we can set undefined as the default value. Now let's define how this global context type will look like. We can do that by defining an interface right here at the top called global context type. First, we'll have an is logged in property, just to let us know whether the user has been logged in, of a type Boolean. Let's make this in uppercase. After that, we'll get the user, which will be of a type user or null. But hey, how does the actual user look like? Well, let's define another interface called user, which will have a $ID property equal to string. It'll have a name equal to string, an email equal to string as well, and finally an avatar equal to string too. Alongside the user, we want to have the global loading state of a type Boolean, as well as the refetch function. This refetch will be a callback function that accepts new params based off of which we can call that refetch function, and it'll be of a type record that accepts a string and then a string or a number, and it will return a promise of void. There we go. So finally, we can create a global provider by saying export const global provider, which will be equal to a React functional component that accepts children, and we can define the type of that children to be equal to React node like this. We of course have to import it from React. And finally, we can open up a function block. Within it, we can immediately return the global context dot provider. And then, as you know, with React context, you can return all the children immediately within it. The goal of this component is not to render any data. It is to wrap the screens with the global context dot provider, which then has access to the values that we want to keep. So in those values, we want to have things like is logged in, user data, and more. And thankfully, we can get all of that by calling the custom use appright hook we have created. So now you'll get to see how we can use it. I'll say const and then destructure something and call it use appright. To it, we need to pass an object of options, specifically a function that we can call. And here, the function will be get current user, which is one of the functions we have defined. So let's actually import it at the top coming from appright. That'll be equal to import get current user coming from /appright. Remember, it's the function we have created. Let's see if I can find it here. We have login, logout, and then get user. We can call it maybe get current user, so it makes more sense because it's the session of the currently logged in user. There we go. So now we have the get user. We're calling the get user, and then immediately out of that, we're getting back a couple of things. We get back the data, which in this case is the actual user. We get the loading state, as well as the ability to refetch the user if necessary. You see how simple it is to call this use appright custom hook once you know what you need to pass in. You just simply pass in the function that you want to call. Later on, you can literally reuse this part, which handles the loading, the error states, and more, by just changing the function you're trying to call. Next, we can also just define whether the isLoggedIn property is true by saying const isLoggedIn, and it'll be equal to !user. Now, why are we doing a double exclamation mark? Well, if you call the exclamation mark on null or an empty user, then it'll turn to true, and you want to call it once again on true to get access to false, meaning user doesn't exist. But if you call it on an existing user, so if you call it on an existing object that has maybe a name of Adrian, then this will actually turn false because an object is truthy by default. So if something is there, you will get a true Boolean value. So in simple words, we use double exclamation mark when we want to turn truthy or falsy values, such as nulls or objects, into Boolean values. After that, we can also console.log the user to see some data about it, maybe by saying json.stringify user null2. This will simply allow us to nicely display the user information in the console. And we can pass all of those values right here into the global context so we can get them from anywhere in the code, such as is logged in, the actual user data, loading, and refetch. And finally, we need a function that will allow us to more easily consume this data from the context. Let's create it and call it use global context as a hook, which will be of a type global context type. And within the function block, we can say const context is equal to use context coming from React, to which we can pass the global context, which we want to call. If there is no context, then we're going to throw a new error saying use global context must be used within a provider, else we'll simply return .context. And let's not forget to export default the global provider so we can actually wrap all of our screens with it. So let's head over to underscore layout and let's wrap our entire application with the global provider. That'll look something like this. I'll put this return statement in multiple lines, and I will start wrapping it right here by calling the global provider, which we just exported, and then we can put the stack right within it. What this means is that every single screen will now have access to the data within the global provider. You can see user role guests missing scope account. If I head back to local and reload, we have this great splash screen, and we can head back over to sign in, and it's looking great. Now, I believe this warning right here will be gone as soon as we sign in, but if it appears later on, we can easily deal with it. For now, I'll just dismiss it, and I'll say continue with Google. You can see now it says Expo wants to use appright.io to sign in. Yep, we'll continue. I chose my JavaScript Mastery account, and I'll click continue. And now the browser closed, and we got a console log of login success. This is the only thing that we needed to see. So let's give it a shot. Let's head over to signin.tsx, and instead of simply saying login success, let's redirect the user to the home screen. We can do that by first getting access to a couple of things from our global context, such as refetch, loading, as well as is logged in. And that's going to be equal to use global context. There we go. Now, what we could do is just redirect, but we are already redirecting whenever we do a refetch. So right here, we can just do a refetch, and that'll automatically redirect to the home screen. So let's go back, reload, and as you can see, now we get back all the information about this specific user. But hey, why can you still go over to the sign-in page? Shouldn't you be automatically redirected to the home? Well, yes, let's go ahead and add a check. I'll say if not loading and if is logged in, we can automatically return a redirect coming from Expo router pointing to a /, meaning homepage. So if I save this, whenever you try to go to sign in, you will automatically be redirected back to home. Great. But before we conclude off, let's make sure that if a user is not there, the user should not see any other pages and must be automatically redirected to the sign-in page. So instead of applying the same but reverse check in every single screen from homepage, explore, profile, and properties, we can do it in a parent layout of these screens. So let's create a new file under app, root, and create a file called _layout.tsx. This is a special layout for the properties and tabs, meaning all the pages that the users have to be authenticated to be able to see. Within here, we can export default function app layout. Within here, we can get access to the loading state and is logged in state by simply calling our use global context. How convenient that is. After that, if it is loading, we can return a safe area view, and within it, we can show an activity indicator. Think of this as a loader. A loader with a class name equal to text-primary-300 and a size of large. Now maybe we can make this always true for now so we can see what we're working on. And if not is logged in, we can simply redirect to the sign-in page. That'll look something like this. href of the redirect will be equal to /sign-in. Of course, the redirect itself is coming from Expo Router. And if we're not loading and if we are logged in, then we can simply return a slot, meaning the current screen that we want to show. The slot, of course, coming from Expo Router. Perfect. Let's give this safe area view a class name equal to bg_white, h-full, flex, justify-center, and items-center. Now, let's try to reload the app. And now you can see this beautiful activity indicator, but it should only happen if we are loading. So if loading, then show the activity indicator, else if not logged in, point to the sign in, else just give me the screen. And that's exactly where we're at right now. We're logged in, we have the currently active user, and we have successfully implemented the auth. So whenever you make some file changes, like adding a new layout, always remember to go to the terminal and press R to reload. Now let's head back over to the global provider and let's remove this console log because we indeed know that the user is there. So in the next lesson, let's go back to our index.tsx and let's turn these ugly links into a tab navigation system that looks much cleaner. To start working on our app's primary navigation, also known as tabs, let's go ahead and create a new file right here under tabs. I'll call it _layout.tsx. Yep, we'll have yet another layout specifically for the 3 pages that we'll be able to navigate through tabs. So we can create it as a shared piece of UI among all 3 pages directly within here. I'll create a new RNFE to quickly spin up a new layout, and I'll call it tabs. We need to reload our application. Don't forget to do that often. And now you can see just tabs at the top left. What we have to do now is wrap everything with the tabs. So tabs is actually a special component coming from React Native. So that'll look something like this. But of course, we cannot have 2 of the same names. So I'll rename this to tabs layout. And then this will be tabs coming from Expo Router. Now, these tabs also have some extra options. So let's say screen options is equal to tab bar show label will be set to false. We don't want to show the label. After that, we have a tab bar style, and we can define it by choosing a background color. It'll be of a color white. We can choose a position. We want to choose absolute. We can next choose a border top color, which will be our primary color, #0061FF1A, and we can choose a border top width of 1, as well as a min height of about 70. And now you can see the tabs appear right here at the bottom. Within the tabs, we can define different screens. So let's create the first screen by saying tabs.screen. It'll be a self-closing component, so we can do it like this, and provide a name equal to index, which is our homepage, with some additional options, such as a title of home, a header shown for that specific screen of false, and then also for each one of these tab screens, we can also choose how we want to display our icon by saying tab bar icon, and we'll do it completely custom by, for now, just returning a piece of view that has a text of home. But as you can see, you can't really fit a lot of text right here as an icon. So instead of that, let's create a custom tab icon component at the top. Const tab icon is equal to a function with an immediate return that looks like this, that returns a view, and within the view, it'll render an image. This image will of course come from React Native, and we can pass a couple of props, such as, is this the currently active one, or focused icon? What is the icon, and what is the title we want to display? And we can define different types for this. Focused is a Boolean, icon can be any, and title will be of a type string. We can also import all the different icons by saying import icons from add / constants / icons. And now we can render source icon coming from props. So instead of rendering a piece of text that says home, let's actually render this tab bar icon by rendering tab icon. And to it, we can pass an image equal to, or no, it was icon, equal to icons.home. If I do this, you can see a big home icon appear. We can also give it a focus state equal to focused, and that is coming directly right here through props of the tab bar icon function. And finally, we can give it a title equal to home. Now we can dive into this tab icon component and style it further. We can style this view by giving it a class name of flex-1, margin top of 3, flex, flex-call, and items-center. Next, we can give this image a tint color depending on the focus state. So if it's focused, we can give it the regular color of #0061FF, else it can be #666876. This is our secondary color. We can also give it a resize mode equal to contain, as well as a class name equal to size of 6. And now it looks a bit nicer. Right below it, we can also render a piece of text that has a class name equal to. Now it'll be dynamic depending on the focus state. So if focused is true, then we can render a text primary 300 with a font of Rubik medium. But else, if it's not focused, we can give it a text black 200 with a font of Rubik. And it can also have a text extra small, W full, text-center, as well as margin top of 1, always, no matter the focus state. And within it, we can render the title. There we go. So now we have a nice home icon. Now it'll be super simple to reuse this for other screens. I will simply copy this entire tab screen and duplicate it 2 more times. For the first one, I'll change the name over to Explore. It has to match the name of our page or the screen with a title of Explore. I'll pass in the icons.search as well as the title of Explore. And finally, for the last one, I'll give it a name of Profile, a title of Profile, and icons of Person, because we want to show the profile page. And now you can see how nice those 3 icons look like at the bottom. And if you click on each one of them, you can see it actually navigates to a different screen and the active state changes. This is looking amazing. And it was pretty simple to make, right? I'll reload the application just to make sure that everything is looking good. And I can even head over to index.tsx to remove the navigation from here. There we go. Now we have the home, the explore, and oh, it says home. Looks like I forgot to change the label or the title. In this case, it was supposed to say profile. There we go. This is now looking amazing, and we are ready to continue. Now, we could either focus on the home or the explore first, but actually, I want to tackle the profile page first, because on the profile page, we'll have a logout button. So that way, we can complete the auth cycle by allowing users to log in, but also to log out. So in the next lesson, let's implement the profile screen. To start implementing the profile screen, let's head over to tabs profile.tsx. And first, we'll develop the UI. So let's start right at the top by defining a function which we'll have on this page called handle logout. And that'll be equal to an async callback function, which for now we'll leave completely empty. Right within JSX, since we'll have more elements on the screen and some smaller height devices might not be able to fit all of them immediately, I will wrap it into a safe area view, coming from React Native safe area view. Now let's switch over to profile on our phone so we can see it. And you can see that profile now fits nicely within there. I'll also give it a class name of h-full, as well as a background of white. Instead of having a simple piece of text that says profile, Within this safe area view, I'll put a scroll view so we can nicely scroll in between the elements if they don't fit on the screen. This scroll view will have two different properties. The first one will be shows vertical scroll indicator, and I will set it to false. And the second one will be a content container class name set to padding bottom of 32 and padding x of 7 to create some space. Of course, let's import this scroll view coming from React Native. Right within it, we can now display a view. This view will contain a piece of text that simply says profile, and we can style it a bit further by giving it a class name of text-extra large, as well as font-rubric-bold. And right below it, we can render an image that'll have a source equal to icons coming from constants icons dot bell, which is the notification icon, with a class name of size of 5. And let's not forget to import the image itself, which is a component coming from React Native. So now we can see this little bell. Let's nicely position this on the screen by giving it a class name equal to flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and a margin top of 5. There we go. So now we have a nice simple heading. Let's go below this view and let's render another view that'll have a class name equal to flex-row, justify-center, flex, and a margin top of 5 to divide it a bit from the profile header. Within it, we can render another view, and this view will have a class name of flex, flex-col this time, so we'll put the elements in a column, items-center, we will render an image. So let's say image with a source of images coming from constants dot avatar. And let's give it a class name equal to size of 44 relative, as well as a rounded dash full property. So now we can render a fake avatar image right here. Later on, we can replace it with a real avatar coming from Upright. And right below this image, let's render a touchable opacity, which is actually a button. And within it, we can render another image with a source equal to icons.edit, allowing the user to edit the icon with a class name of size-9. So that's going to look something like this. There we go. And we can, of course, style this touchable opacity a bit by giving it a class name of absolute, bottom-11, right-2. And let's not forget to go below the touchable opacity and add a text. That'll render your name. For now, we can put it statically here. Later on, we can get real data. So I'll put Adrian, add JS mastery, and I'll style it by giving it a class name equal to text-2xl, font-rubric-bold, and a margin top of 2. I think I can just say JSM here, and now this will look even better. Perfect. Now let's go below this view and below one other view to create a view that will contain some settings. I'll create a view that'll have a class name equal to flex, flex-col, and a margin top of 10. And within it, we can display some settings items. Of course, I'm referring to these list items. So each list item will follow a specific structure, such as it'll have an icon, a title, and then a link to visit more info. So we can create it as a custom component right here above the profile, and I'll call it const settings item is equal to an immediate return component that returns a touchable opacity, because each one of these links will be clickable. And then within it, we can render a view. Within that view, we can render an image, within which we'll render a source of icon that we decide to pass into it, as well as a piece of text that'll simply render the title. Of course, if you run this now, we won't be able to use it because we have to pass some props to each one of these settings items. We have to accept things like an icon, a title, an on press, a text style, in case we want to style it a bit differently, as well as a show arrow, which by default will be set to true because we want to show the arrow for most items besides the logout. Let's also say that all of these are of a type settings item props. And now we can define those props right here so we know what we need to pass in. That'll be an interface of settings item props where we accept an icon, which will be of a type image source prop type coming from React Native. We also get a title of a type string, an onPress, which is a callback function that returns nothing, as well as a text style, which is optional of a type string, and a show arrow, which is optional of a type Boolean. So now let's actually call this settings item right here below. Within this view, I will call our first settings item, and you can see how WebStorm immediately fills in all of the necessary props and gives me the possibility to edit one after another. So icon will come from icons, coming from constants, and then the title will be set to my bookings, and I think we don't even need an onPress on this one. So now if we save this, it's going to say my bookings, where we get the icon, but it's complaining a bit saying that icon is not assignable. So let's see what that is about. We can also make onPress optional, as we won't need it with every single component, and this is looking good to me. Of course, this was supposed to be icons.calendar. So now we can see my bookings and then the icon. I'll also duplicate this settings item one more time below, and I'll actually make this a bit smaller so it nicely fits in one screen. There we go. I think this is much easier to look at. The second one I will change to settings.wallet, and I'll rename it to payments. Now, if we modify our settings item, we can give it some styles. By giving this touchable opacity a class name of flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and a padding Y of 3. That's going to create some space. Once we click it, we can also render onPress and make it equal to the onPress that we pass in as a prop. We can further style this view by giving it a class name of flex, flex-row, items-center, and a gap of 3 in between the elements. To the image itself, we can change the size by setting the size to be equal to 6. And then for the text, we can render some additional styles, such as a class name equal to text-lg, font-rubric-medium, and text-black-300 for the color. And if we want to apply some additional styles, we can render this dynamically, end it dynamically here as well. And then we can also render the text styles, the additional ones, after these base styles that we pass as a prop to different settings items. And finally, right here below this view, we can render a dynamic block of code that checks if show arrow is true, and only if it is, then we render an image with a source equal to icons.rightArrow with a class name of size of 5. There we go. So now this is looking more like a real settings page. Now we can go a bit down below this view containing the first 2 settings items, and we can render another view. This time with a class name equal to flex, flex-col, margin top of 5, border of t, padding top of 5, border-primary-200. This will just add a little border to divide some settings from other settings. So now we can map over these settings coming from data.ts, .slice, and we'll slice over the first 2 initial ones, and then we'll map over the remaining settings. By saying map, we get an item for each one of these, as well as an index. And then we simply show a new settings item for each one of these settings. So let's render a key since we're mapping over it. That'll be equal to the index. And we can also spread the rest of the item. Item, because it'll contain the icon, the title, and more. And now immediately we get all of these other options available. And how did they get here? Well, if you command click into the settings, you'll notice that we have them under constants data.ts, where it's a simple list of objects where each object has a title and an icon. Nothing more. Finally, we have to implement a button to log out, So let's go below this view and let's actually copy that view to create one more border. There we go. And then within that view, we can render another settings item, but this one will have an icon equal to icons.logout with a title of logout, a text style equal to text-danger, a show arrow set to false, and on press, we'll simply call the handle logout function we have declared at the top. And now you can see this logout button. It is at the bottom, and that's where you typically want to place it in all app settings because that's not an action that people frequently do. But as you can notice, even though I have a device with a lot of height, you can still scroll up and down to get to more settings. So now, before we implement the logout, let's fetch the real user data so we can display it right here instead of this fake one. I'll do that right here at the top by using the global context we have declared before. I'll say const and destructure the user as well as a refetch function, and that's going to be equal to use global context, just like so. Alongside this, we can also declare the function to logout, which will be equal to the function called logout that we created before. So I'll say const result is equal to await logout. Make sure to import it at the top. And if we do get a successful result, we will then run an alert by getting the alert functionality, .alert, and we'll say success, you have been successfully logged out. Else, we'll simply do an alert saying error, an error occurred while logging out. With that in mind, we can now use this real data right here where it says images.avatar. Instead of that, for the source, I will actually pass an object called URI and set it to be equal to user ? .avatar. And now we get a real avatar for JavaScript Mastery for my specific account. And I can also change my name right here by rendering a real user ? .name, JavaScript Mastery. Perfect. If you want to, you can also implement the edit profile photo later on. But for now, let's implement the logout functionality to complete the entire authentication flow. We're already doing that right here as we're already passing the handle logout to the logout button. And one more thing we can do is after a successful logout, we can run refetch, because in refetch, we're revalidating the currently logged in user and then renavigating it to the sign up page if needed. So with that said, let's go ahead and test out the logout functionality by simply pressing the logout button. Perfect, that works as expected. We'll deal with this little error message later on once we dive into the role and scope system. For now, I will dismiss it and I will sign in once again to test out the login. And there we go, I have been redirected to the home screen and we can now move between home, explore, and profile. Great. Of course, the next big thing is to implement the page that we get redirected to right after we log in, and that is the home page. So let's do that.